Welcome, everyone. Hello to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. We have a couple folks in the room with us as well. Thanks for being here to learn a bit about the Office of Sponsored Programs. Very grateful to Hallie Lyons, who is going to do this overview. My name is Elizabeth Perry, and I'm the director of the Faculty Center. And I'm just going to turn it right over to Hallie, and we will go right into it. By the way, we are recording, just so you know. And can I see any of the details, or is that an option? Yeah, sure. Okay. All right. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
So, morning, everyone. I'm going to just give you a pretty high-level overview of what the Office of Sponsored Programs does. Maybe I'll close this real quick because now I can't see my. Okay, I'm going to get my laptop open. Okay, so my name is Hallie Lyons. The CRA stands for Certified Research Administrator. I'm the Associate Director for Grants and Contracts in the Office of Sponsored Programs. And I'm hitting click. Oh, I need to do something. I was trying to go. Sorry. Technical difficulties. It worked when we tried it earlier. Maybe it's a battery thing. Okay.
Try clicking back on PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Oh,
There we go.
it's information from the computer science department. Thank you. I wanted to see the people, but I don't see them. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so the objectives for this hour are to explain the structure and the responsibilities of the different roles within the Office of Sponsored Programs. Also to outline the process of preparing and submitting proposals on behalf of UNLV, to describe the characteristics of most budgets and explain the facilities and administrative costs. And then just to give a brief definition that provides the distinction between gifts and sponsored programs. Gifts are run through the UNLV Foundation. Sometimes there's some gray area and some crossover there. So just to kind of define that further. So first, what even is a sponsored program or project? Project and program are used interchangeably. So a sponsored project is defined as an activity that is sponsored or funded by an external organization. And that can be from federal funds, state funds, private organizations, industry, or some agency that falls under one or all of those. So the project can also include research, but it can also provide funding. The agency or the sponsor can provide funding for a sponsored program that would be for public service, a health program that benefits children in the community. I mean, so it's not, we don't sponsor programs. Our office doesn't do research exclusively. And sometimes people think, oh, it's not research. It doesn't go through OSP. Anything that's sponsored extramurally runs through the Office of Sponsored Programs. So again, that can be research, public service, training, fellowships, or fall under some other sponsored activity category. And as I said, the project can be supported by a number of different sponsors. So National Science Foundation, NASA, NIH, those are the heavy hitters in terms of the feds, but we also have a variety of state agencies that put out requests for funding that we respond to, private foundations, Sony, high tech. We have, so sponsors can be anyone who's providing us funding, and also nonprofit organizations will put out calls for proposals. Sponsored program activities can be identified as a grant, a contract, a sub-grant, a subcontract, sub-award, cooperative agreement. There are a lot of mechanisms that sort of fall under this umbrella of sponsored programs. Each mechanism has specific terms and conditions. Some are a little more flexible. Some are fixed price and they say, here's 50 grand, get it done. Whether it comes in under or comes in over, others are cost reimbursable, which is as we spend, we get reimbursed. So they take on all different, they have all different factors or variables. And so then the overall indicator that an activity is a sponsor project is that the sponsor is providing support for a specific activity, and the activity delivers something back to the sponsor. So for example, if you got an award, a travel award through an association, you applied for it, it's extramural funding, but it's giving you $1,500 directly to you to go to a conference, that we wouldn't consider that a sponsor program. It's not meeting that sort of benefit on both sides. It's more of an award kind of directly to faculty. So we'll sponsor programs, our office will make that determination if that's something that runs through your department or if it's something that needs to run through sponsor programs. Same thing with the foundation, as I mentioned earlier, if something really has the characteristics of a gift that mostly has no strings attached and says, here's the, put this in our name or do whatever, but it's not a mutual kind of benefit, we'll determine where it should go. Again, the characteristics of a sponsor program mostly include some kind of scope of work and a set of specific aims, and that we are financially accountable, that we report on those funds, that the funds are budgeted separately, so they're not just in a big pot of, operating funds, that they're specific to a project, and they're accounted for a specific period of performance. So it's not just the fiscal year that's determined by the state. It's a period, a specified period of performance, and then deliverables, whether that's a final technical report, maybe it's software, whatever that, maybe it's just a survey. It depends on what the scope is and what the deliverable is. So this is a summary of what my office does. Oops, I hit the microphone. Sorry to those out there. I might have given you a jolt. We assist faculty with finding the funding opportunities in the first place, and especially new faculty. We recently, within the last couple of years, procured a web-based system called Pivot that's really cool. And I don't know all the ins and outs, but Althea Sheets, who's our communications manager, is a Pivot guru. And what that does is you meet with Althea, she walks through or directs you to a presentation that walks you through Pivot. But as far as I know, it's pretty intuitive and pretty user-friendly. And you put in your keywords, what the work is you're doing, and you can select different kinds of sponsors, but it does a huge search for you, not just federal agencies, not just nonprofits, and it's linking the funding sources to the kind of work that you're doing. And it's pretty comprehensive. And I think, and you can develop a profile so that you'll get hits, every week or every month or whatever, telling you, hey, there are 5 funding opportunities that are due within the next, 6 months. Are you interested? So, and you can really tailor them to your profile. So Althea Sheets is in my office, and all of the information for the contact information for people in my office is on our website. So we first help you with that. Then we help you once you've identified what you want to apply for, then we help you with the preparation and the submission. Our office is the only authorized office to submit proposals on behalf of the university. So even if you're in negotiations, let's say there's a non-competitive process and you've got some friends at Sony and they want to, I'm not going to say hire because they're not going to hire us, but they want to, form an agreement with UNLV for you to test something, build something. And so that's not going to require, that's not going to be a request for proposal with all of these specifics, but it's still going to come through my office for us to help you negotiate that, figure out the right budget, figure out the terms and conditions we can and cannot accept as a public institution of higher ed. And we are restricted in some ways because we're public and we're higher ed. We're not industry, we're not for-profit, we fall into a different category. So what we'll do is, and again, this doesn't apply for, this is what we would call like full proposals. So a concept paper, a white paper, a one-pager to get feelers out, whether it's to the feds or industry or whatever, you go to town on that. That's not we don't need to see that or review that. Our office does no peer review. So we're really looking at these proposals from a high level compliance perspective. This is supposed to be 2 pages. You just wrote 4. It's going to get kicked out because you didn't comply, so we're here to help you get have the best chance of being funded. The science is on you. And because we're not scientists. And so again, white papers, pre-proposals that don't involve, an extensive budget, those do not need to run through our office. That's again, kind of a preliminary phase of thing, but all full proposals do. And then when your proposal gets accepted and awarded, which is awesome, our office also then negotiates that for you, accepts and executes the award. So when it's a grant, which just generally speaking is financial assistance as opposed to procurement. A contract is more of a procurement. There's a very set expectation. A grant in general is to further our knowledge, to further our mission. Grants typically aren't negotiated. They're pretty standard and there's nothing that we find fault with in terms of giving up intellectual property or anything like that. And they're pretty overarching. And so grants typically aren't negotiated. Contracts, however, which also falls under my division in our office, contracts are negotiable. I use Sony as an example just because we had an agreement recently, but and this isn't what happened with the agreement, but let's just say Sony said, we're going to enter into an agreement with UNLV, but by the way, anything you develop is 100% ours. Well, as a university and people in my office we're there to protect you and the university. We're not going to sign that deal. We're going to negotiate back and forth about background IP and who does what and how does everybody get credit and who gets ownership and what's so that's where the contracting piece is really important. Grants, by and large, are not negotiated. You've submitted something that the funder is interested in and they're giving you the funds. So a little difference between the grants and contracts. But if there was something being negotiated, we would do that. And then we set up these sponsored agreements in our financial system, which is Workday. And that's the logistics of it, right? So now you have an account number, an internal account number with the start and end date. You can't spend before it. You can't spend after it. We're giving you those parameters. And it's sort of that's now how you hire someone and how you buy a computer and how you buy equipment and supplies and how you travel. That's the internal workings of the finances once we accept the award on UNLV's behalf. So our office does that too. Our office then also assists you with any adjustments that happen along the way. So now your scope of work, you really thought you were going to do this, but now you need 3 postdocs to achieve what you thought you needed 2 for. You thought you needed a GA, but you really don't. You need to go to another conference or, whatever those changes are in the scopes, the budgets, that also runs through our office because the Office of Sponsored Programs acts as the liaison between the faculty and the funding sponsor. That's really what our job is. So we will be looking at things for compliance sake and to see, the sponsor won't allow you to do that. Let's check with them and see if we can get their approval. There are some pretty standard regulations that are followed. The federal financial assistance follows what's called the uniform guidance, and it comes out of the Office of Management and Budget. And there are things that aren't allowed. We can't buy booze with grant funds, so there are certain things that are no-nos, and then other things we have to ask, for approval on. So our office is the people who will help you with that. And so we'll request, for a no-cost extension, you need another year. Typically, grants are extended another year pretty unanimously. Changes in scope, a PI leaves, comes all of that. And then we also invoice the sponsor. So our office does the finances in terms of we're going to bill Sony. Sony's going to pay us back. For the feds, we do what's called a drawdown. The feds put money in an account for us and we draw it down as we spend it. That's cost reimbursable and how that works. So our office does that too. In other universities, that's handled exclusively at the controller's office or accounts payable or somewhere else, but it's internal in our office. So our office is sort of that A to Z one-stop shop. And then once everything's been invoiced and paid and reimbursed and you've submitted your final report, will close out the award with the sponsor and internally. So the different roles in our office, we have basically for every department and college around campus, you have 3 contacts. And again, the way Office of Sponsor Programs is structured around the country really varies, but this is what we found to work so far in our office. And that is, you've got a research administrator for pre-award. Okay, so you haven't even been funded yet. You've identified the funding. Now you work with Althea Sheets, who I talked about earlier, to identify the funding. Once you've decided you're going to apply, you work with your college or department assigned research pre-award person, research administrator. And that pre-award research administrator is going to review the request for proposals. Sometimes these requests for proposals can be upwards of 200 pages with legalese and what you need to submit. Sometimes they're a 1-pager from a nonprofit that says, upload 3 things and we'll let you know. So it really runs the gamut. These RFPs, they take time, review. We want to make sure that we are telling you exactly, what needs to be done, but it's also your responsibility due to our volume to read that RFP, to know what you need to start preparing, how long that's going to take you, and what you need to submit. We'll also help you with budget preparation and/or review. And when I say and/or review, I mean that there are a handful of department research administrators around campus, not nearly enough, but a few. And I don't know how many of you have them and what all the departments you're from. If you have one, that's the first stop in terms of the budget and for someone to assist you. Most departments in campus and colleges around campus do not have one. So you'll come to us to help with the budget and review of that. And then that pre-award research administrator checks the entire proposal for compliance and submits on behalf of UNLV and the PI. Once the award comes in and gets accepted and granted, it comes to my shop, which is the grants and contracts. And so you have now someone who's your representative in OSP, who, if you have questions, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I hire this person? I need more time. That's the person that you go to once your award has come in and you have questions about it and you need things done. And we're, again, that voice, that liaison between you and the agency. You may have your technical contact or your program officer at NSF, and you both know each other and you're talking about the scope and what needs to be done and what needs to be done, and everyone's on the same page. Unless the contract people talk to my office, nothing will officially get changed, even if it's approved by your program officer. The contract person at NIH or NSF will request something official about that change, and that comes from my office. So, and then the contract manager, you as faculty really will not have too much interaction with. The research administrators on the grants and contract side will also help you with your contracts. Our contract manager is there to really redline and negotiate agreements directly with the sponsors. So she may ask for some input now and then, but she's going to work mostly through the research administrators in my office. Yeah.
So just to make sure that I understand the
Yeah.
process, here we have our pre-award admin, and then they'll work with the contract manager before we would ever deal with our grants and contracts admin, right?
Actually, the pre-award is only once it gets submitted. And once it's submitted, then they're off the job. Now, if it gets awarded, you'll exclusively work with your RA grants and contracts because it's already here and it's awarded. So the pre-award is only helping you submit the proposal.
Right, but the contract manager was involved in between those steps.
The contract manager is involved after we get the award, and you've already dealt with your research administrator on the grants and contract side. So the contract manager is a little behind the scenes negotiating directly with the sponsor, but the RA will be the one that you work with if you were to get an agreement or contract that you wanted to talk about one that's forthcoming. You'll always start with the RA.
And
for grants and contracts.
if we have RAs assigned to our department, how would we find them?
They're on the website by department.
And I can put that website in the chat. Is it the research?
It's college assignments. It's UNLV OSP, and then about us and college department assignments. Yep. And it's being overhauled a little bit because we've had some shifts, but it should say, you should get that information, but also we can put my contact information. I can help with whatever questions you have. And you're right to ask the question. It's a little wonky with the contract manager, but the RAs are really your point of contact, and then they will work with the contract manager to get the negotiations in place with industry. So if the contract manager comes back to the RA and says, well, I need to know more about the scope, that RA is still going to be your point person. So, and then the third person, so I'm not counting the contract person, but I just wanted to tell you about her. But the third person, that's your direct contact, is the person who is approving the finances, is invoicing the sponsors, drawing down the federal funds, doing the financial reporting that's required for some projects, and then budget amendments. So you found out you needed $500 extra in one category, but you don't need it in the other. There's a form you would submit to the financial research accountant, and they would go behind the scenes in Workday, which is the financial system, and make those adjustments, and then closing out the accounts. Oh, there's well, actually, this link gives you, you can click it, right? This gives the proposal to award life cycle, and it will tell you here who you would go to for what, and it's broken down in a lot more specifics. So, but again, it says, please note all contract related documents begin with the college unit designated RA. So you really have your pre-award RA, your grants and contracts RA, and your financial RA. Those are the people you have at OSP. So go to the next. I have two systems going, my laptop and this, I have to do both. Okay. Just to give you some numbers, OSP reviews and submits around 500 to 600 proposals on behalf of UNLV per year. Currently, this is being handled by only 3 people. Nationwide, that is really low. And so your patience is appreciated. OSP then in return accepts, negotiates, sets up, and administers about 400 to 500 awards. Those are not apples to apples. The same 500 to 600 are not necessarily those same 400 to 500, but those are our metrics for how much, the volume we're dealing with. Again, that's also being handled by a different 3 people. So 3 pre-award people for the whole campus, 3 grants and contracts people for the whole campus. One of those is me. That shouldn't be, but is. And so that's where we are in terms of staffing. We're trying. It's a tough time right now to get people. I think everybody knows that. So this is an extreme high volume for so few people. We hope this to be different, but again, to give you the numbers, there are only so many of us doing this stuff. Quickly, just some nomenclature, and I won't go into it too much, but the term like FNA is thrown around a lot. And I just wanted everyone to know that FNA does mean something, and it means facilities and administrative costs. And those are what's called the indirect costs or the overhead. So FNA, indirect, overhead, all interchangeable. And those are real costs that it takes to keep the lights on and the library open and the parking people working. And so, I mean, it's been federally negotiated for UNLV. So UNLV has different rates depending on whether it's on-campus research, off-campus research, maybe it's not research at all and it's an other sponsored activity. We have federally negotiated rates, and how that is determined is through a huge process and an audit saying, we think it takes 49.5% in order to pay all the bills and do what needs to be done and kind of keep the infrastructure alive. Yale University, for example, has a 67% federally negotiated rate. Some national labs have over 100%. So UNLV has 49.5 for research, and I'll have another slide about that. But these are real costs that we need to keep the university going in addition to the state funds that we get as a budget, which those have been slashed over the years as well. So the FNA is really important. And then fringe benefits. Sometimes those terms also get used interchangeably. Oh, fringe, but someone means FNA. Fringe benefits are the employee associated costs, it's healthcare, it's workers' comp, all of those things. And we have moved from direct costs to pooled rates. So if you're academic faculty, there's a pooled rate. If you're an hourly student, there's a pooled rate. If you're a GA, graduate assistant, there's a pooled rate. So we use pooled rates when we're submitting proposals. So those are two terms that are important. And so as I was saying, in terms of our rates for research, you can see these are all federally negotiated and provisional until we do another indirect cost proposal to see if we stay at the 49%. Since I've been on campus, cannot believe it, 17 years, and the indirect was 44% when I started, and it's gone a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up. It's kind of, been up and down, but we've stayed pretty steady around the 48 and 49.5. So it gets negotiated every few years. So right now, the research you can see is 49.5. Then other sponsored activity, if it was a public health program, it's not research, but it's just giving out something or a survey or training or something like that. Off campus 36, off campus 26 rather, on campus 36. The 26% is the A part of the FNA, and that's the administrative part. So if we're not using labs, we're not using all kinds of other facilities, but we're still using administrative support people to help us do stuff, that's the 26%. So it's 26%, and then on top of that makes up the 49.5 for research. And then that FNA is allocated back around out to the campus to support the infrastructure. So just a little very simple example. Well, this is how it's distributed. So monthly, as you spend, you pay your grad student, you go on a trip, you buy something. That's a cost that we bill the sponsor. We also bill the sponsor the overhead associated with that, or the FNA, or the indirect cost. We get all of that reimbursed, but only the cost that you spent need to get reimbursed on one side. The FNA then gets distributed administratively. So 4% of that for every sponsored program goes to the library, 4% to the provost, 4% to the president. You can see a bulk of it, most of it goes to the VP for research, because these are sponsored programs and we want to give back to the infrastructure. And then 40 goes back to the college. So the college can then determine how that 40% gets split even further. And that's by college. There's no set formula. Maybe a college says to a PI, you're going to get 5% back, 2%. We're going to give some here, some there. So that's the split of where the overhead FNA, where that goes. So again, just a really kind of brief example. You spent $10,000. We bill the sponsor $10,000 plus the $49.50 that's associated with it. So the sponsor gives us the $14,950 back. We reimburse for the expenses of the $10,000, and then $198 goes to the library. You can see the rest, right? So $1980 goes back to the college, and that's for every single award. And then the college will then further distribute that.
I have a question from a Zoomer.
Sure.
Heather asks, is that for all research grants and contracts, or is this just for grants?
It's for all sponsored activities. So that's why too, we have different rates. So the rates will be non-research rates. So we've got other sponsored activity and we've got instruction and training. Those have been negotiated too. So the goal is for us to apply these negotiated rates to every agreement that we get coming into the university from extramural funding. There are cases in which, there's a training grant and there's a cap of 8%. The sponsor, the federal agency says, we're only going to pay 8%. Well, we're going to apply for that anyway, but we're only going to get 8%. We can't charge our 49.5, if you will. We can't submit a budget with that. But so every grant, every contract, every sponsor program agreement will have the FNA assessed and included in every budget, unless there's a good reason why it shouldn't, because we want to invest back in the infrastructure. I hope that answered that. So then, are you eligible to be a principal investigator, which is necessary for any sponsor program? There has to be one point of contact, and we call that the principal investigator, the PI. And that's the individual who's ultimately responsible for the funded project, the intellectual and day-to-day conduct of the project, the finances. I mean, ultimately, that PI is who's responsible. There must be some kind of reasonable prospect of, long-term employment. So we have restrictions on who can be a PI. If you're under an FTE, a percentage of your time, you are not eligible. If you don't have a certain title, you're not eligible automatically. There are exceptions, but this is what it means to be a PI and the policy at UNLV. And so the policy here says that only full-time academic faculty that have appointments of 50% or more may serve as the PI. This is automatic, and the university won't submit these proposals for funding or approve requests without making sure that the PI is eligible. So my office will make sure that you're eligible, and if you're not, there's an exception process, which is a form with your CV to say, okay, I don't meet this condition, but let me tell you why I'm the only one who can really, do this project and how beneficial it is to campus and to the community. And for this one exception, may I request this PI, eligibility. And so again, this does not include postdocs are not automatically eligible. Graduate students are never eligible. And so these full-time members have these titles: professor, research faculty, resident faculty, associate, assistant, all of those titles, you're granted automatic PI status. But if you aren't one of those, then we have the exceptions. Okay, so you found the funding opportunity. You're PI eligible. What do you do now to get started? So you first read that RFP from top to bottom. RFPs, requests for proposals, are also called program solicitations. They're also called funding announcement opportunities. They can be called a variety of things, but you read that from top to bottom to see if if you qualify in terms of your work and what the program is and what the request is. And the research administrator on the pre-award side will also let you know if for some reason the university isn't eligible. Maybe you found some great thing, but it's only geared towards businesses, or it's only geared towards tribal colleges, or, like we're not eligible as a university, or it's only geared towards private institutions. And so then we'll let you know if there's a question, if there's doubt about whether UNLV as an institution is eligible, your pre-award research administrator can help you with that. And then let OSP pre-award research administrator know as soon as you decide that you want to submit. What we have happen is that you decide that, but we don't know that. And then we know that a week before and are not really able to give you the type of service and sufficient review that's necessary. So, and even if you are thinking about it, it's great to let us know, because we can put it on a big calendar and then we know, wow, we have 10 due that week. This one's thinking about it, so that we can get our workload, get an idea of what we've got going on. So just let us know as early as possible so we can get it on our calendar. And then we can go through the RFP and give you just a checklist. Okay, you know what? They need these 5 documents, and this one has to be in this format, and this one has to be 3 pages, and this one you need a letter from your chair, and this one, whatever it is, we can give you that synopsis of what needs to be done. OSP, again, is not going to peer review the science or we don't, because of the volume, it's impossible for us to do that. So what we're looking at is that high level, page limits. Did you meet these basic requirements so that your proposal doesn't get rejected for these formatting issues or compliance issues? The science is the science. You're going to get reviewed and either accepted or rejected based on that, or a cranky reviewer, or the program doesn't fit with a certain center. I mean, there are a variety of reasons why it's very competitive to get funding. So, but we want to give you the best chance of getting that. So, and another thing to remember is that sometimes PIs say, yeah, I've got it all done. I've got it all done. Yeah, you got the 15-page project narrative done, which, yes, is really important. But this one solicitation requires 10 more documents. Your current CV, and your CV maybe has to include something specific for this one program, or your current and pending support, or you need a letter from an industry partner, or you need all these things. And so then it comes down and you think you're done, but you're not really done. So you need to just, that's why we're here to help you say, no, we have a lot more to do. Most of the proposal submissions will be prepared and submitted within a sponsor portal, and they'll be electronic. And we, Office of Sponsor Programs, we maintain memberships and passwords and, organizational profiles for all of the big ones. We might have a nonprofit or an industry or something that has a web portal that we've never done before. So then we'll sign up as the institution, so that can take a little time, but all the heavy hitters, we already have been submitting proposals there. So we're set up in terms of that. And depending on the sponsor, depending on the portal, either NSF requires the PI to start a proposal. It's impossible for my office to do it. Whereas NIH assists, either one can start the proposal. So it just depends. And usually we allow each other access so we can both, see and work on these submissions together. Sometimes, again, it's a nonprofit that says, email us 5 pages with a budget by the end of the week. So I mean, it just ranges. And that would come from my office, from our official email, copying you, saying, here's our proposal on behalf of UNLV. So the proposals can be 200 pages or 2 pages. It just depends on the sponsor. And then some proposals will be after the fact, and that's when the contracts come in. So sometimes the state has already been talking to you and you've already negotiated that you're going to be doing something. We don't know anything about it until the agreement comes in. Well, for our records, we're going to need a proposal. And when we say proposal, you must have submitted something to the state or at least talked about it or they wouldn't be interested. So you have to have at minimum a scope of work, even if it's a paragraph, budget and budget justification, and a routing form, which means you signed as your PI, your chair and dean signed that they know what you're doing. So that's at the bare minimum for every proposal, every grant, contract, sponsored agreement. We need a routing form, scope of work, budget justification. The budget justification is the narrative, the words that describe your dollar amount. So when you say 50K in supplies, you have to break that down a little bit. What do you mean? Well, I need this many computers, this, so that we know, we can review that, again, everything's in compliance, that you're not budgeting in for something that's not allowable. There are a few things that are not allowable. And so we'll help you determine that. Our deadlines for, again, these are competitive proposals, is 5 days prior, business days prior to the sponsor's deadline. We need to have that internal routing form that I just talked about, a complete draft of everything that's required in the proposal, whether it's a small amount or a bit large amount. And then we have 5 business days to review prior to the deadline so we can make sure that everything's in compliance. In a perfect world, we would want to submit a couple days before the deadline because some of these portals, I did just see some stats though, nationwide, people submit, I want to say 97%, something crazy that proposals are submit on the same day, like nationwide. So I think I don't have the science, but I think once you say there's a deadline, that everybody pushes it to the deadline. Psychologically, it's there, you have until midnight, so you'll write until 11 p.m. And that it just happens. And as far as the narrative and the science being tweaked, because we understand that, okay, we understand that even collaborating, 2 to 3 days before you say, you know what, I needed to add this section, I really need to, that's fine. We're looking for 5 business days that everything is as complete as possible, especially that your CV is not changing, your current things are not going to change. We need all that stuff. If you have to tweak that research strategy a little bit, a couple days before, that's okay. But we have to start implementing this policy a little more strictly. So, and again, the contracts are, again, a little bit in a different box, but because there is no formal really proposal, unless there is one. But if you've just been negotiating with one another, you didn't submit to an RFP, you just established a scope of work together. We still need to get the routing form, scope of work, budget and budget justification, just even get the contract started. That's kind of our first step of getting it entered into our database and saying we've reviewed everything, we're ready to start negotiating. Budgeting. I love this cartoon. I don't remember where I found it or who had it, but I need a budget, the scientist says, PI says. I need a budget estimate for my project, but I don't have a scope or a design for it yet. My office says, well, okay, then my estimate is, I can't see without my glasses, 3,583,729. That's the estimate. And the PI says, well, you don't know anything about my project. And I say, well, that makes two of us. So you do need to know what your scope is before you develop the budget. Sometimes some funding opportunity announcements will say 500,000 per year. So you just throw a budget together for 500,000 per year, but really, because that's what they're offering, reviewers know, they really know when your scope doesn't match your budget. And in fact, I just recently had quite a few reviews about that, where it was really the other way around, where we lowballed some things because thinking that would look better, and it doesn't. The reviewer said, well, the national lab can't do that for that amount. So it's just better to be realistic. And then if you need to pare down because of the limits, they say you can only have 200,000 a year, you put your realistic budget together and it's 300, we'll pare your scope down so that it gets to 200, but your scope and budget really should match. Reviewers know when you're lowballing and when you're highballing, they do. Just prepare the budget early, which means you're preparing the scope early, make it one of the first things that you do. And think about your project and all that's required and even contingencies. So if I don't have, maybe if this, design doesn't work out, or this analysis, if I need more, if something goes awry, let me budget for that, but have it as long as it's justifiable, not just padded, that something might happen and you might need more in a certain category. Again, the overarching regulation is called uniform guidance, and it just says that costs, a lot of it's vague, but it just says these costs must be reasonable. Is it reasonable that you need a Jaguar car to go do something, that you could rent a car when you get there, or whatever it is? Is it reasonable? Is it allocable? Is it consistently treated? So you can't pay someone way over here and pay someone way under here, and conform to, you also have to conform to the limitations or exclusions in the funding announcement. Sometimes funders say, we're not going to pay for tuition reimbursement, or we're not going to pay for any foreign travel, or whatever it is, they can restrict whatever they want. And so we have to comply with that. But most basically, you're going to have personnel and fringe, which is going to be your biggest, most often, unless you're doing a major research instrumentation grant, which is from NSF, where your budget is the $250,000 laser or whatever. Typically, the bulk of your budget is going to be in people, students, postdocs, yourself, summer salary, it's going to be in personnel and fringe benefits. Going to have some materials and supplies that you need, again, depending on the scope, depending on the project. Equipment, which is defined as something that's a single unit, $5,000, that has a certain shelf life, that it's different than materials and supplies, which are more expendable. Subawards, are you going to give a portion of the award that you got from NSF to Yale? You're going to subaward a part of that work. Maybe there's a co-PI at Yale and you're going to give some of that out. They're going to do that part at their lab. You're going to do your part here. And then that F&A that we've talked about. So then that's going to be assessed on every project. F&A is only charged to everything except tuition, equipment, subawards after the first 25,000. That's negotiated because we know those costs are going to be very large typically. I'm not quite sure the rationale behind why it's not charged to tuition, but is a rationale, but subawards only on the first 25. So F&A is assessed on almost every budget category, but a handful. And so here are our fringe benefit rates, just so you know. So all your faculty and staff, the pooled rate is 29.4. Letter of appointments are temporary faculty, temporary appointments, 19 medical residents, graduate assistants, and then students and all of that. And so these fringe benefits include retirement, workers' comp, and those are assessed on every salary line in your budget. So here's just a very quick, very basic budget idea is you've got a 9-month base salary of 75,000 as a professor. And so one summer month, and we typically do budget for summer months because you have teaching obligations and other obligations during the year. There are options to buy out a course if you get funding, but more than not, we're budgeting for summer salary is what we call it. And you're eligible for 3/9 of that. So of your base. So we say you make 75 for the 9 months. One summer month is 8,300. The fringe tacked on to that, which is the fringe benefit, is the 29.4. You need 25 grand in materials and supplies. You need 5,000 to go to a couple conferences. You have one piece of equipment, like a big server, that's 10 grand that you want. Your total direct costs now are 50,783. Your indirect costs are assessed on everything above except equipment. So that's when you have something called a modified total direct cost, which is what the indirect is calculated against. So that's where that 20,188 comes in. No indirect was charged. The 49.5 was not charged on that 10,000 line because equipment is exempt from that. So that's a very basic budget and just an explanation of what we would then submit to the sponsor. And they would say, great, you're awarded 70,971. And then as we spend, we're going to invoice them that has the direct costs along with the indirect, and they're going to reimburse us. That's typically how things are done. But again, there are fixed prices and they're all different. Our famous response in research administration to any question is, it depends, which is not very satisfying, but it really is the truth. So just a synopsis of working with OSP, contact that OSP research administrator for pre-award just as soon as you can. That's really your first stop after maybe you talk to Althea to get a pivot profile set up and you've identified there are 50 opportunities out there that somehow relate to the work that you're interested in. And now you've selected one you want to go for. Let the pre-award OSP RA know as soon as possible. Read the whole funding announcement RFP so you know what you're doing matches and you know the timeline it's going to take you. If you got to write 5 pages as opposed to 20, you're going to budget your time differently. So make sure you get the routing form going because that's just the logistics of it. You need it regardless of what you're doing. Get it going with the PI signing, your chair and dean, and then the copy of really the most finalized draft that you can 5 business days before the deadline. That is our policy. It's the only way we can provide sufficient review. If things come in after that, we can't guarantee one sufficient review and or submission. We have such a volume, we have to have the 5 business days. Again, nationwide, it's pretty standard. There are some universities that require 10 business days and will not submit unless everything is perfect by 10 days. Some are, it varies, but 5 is pretty average. And again, if there's a contract or agreement, there was no RFP, it's just a handshake deal with you and somebody else, and they want to write an agreement to the university, talk to your research administrator, the grants and contracts person, give them as much information as possible. Hey, we're going to do this, but guess what? It's a clinical trial and we need to do this. The research administrator will make sure we're in compliance, that the budget is appropriate, that we've negotiated any terms we need to with the agency or the sponsor. And so communication. The more we get from you, the better we can help. So sometimes what we do, have this volume. So if you email me and say, and the subject line is NSF, and you don't provide a lot of information, I've submitted 20 NSFs the last week. So just as much information as you can provide, the better we can help you. We'll be able to, help you the more you give us. And lastly, just so I give a quick definition of the difference, because we do have the foundation and there are gifts that are given to the university, and there are gifts that are given for research and gifts that are given for other sponsored activities that seem like not quite sure which pot this falls under or into. This is sort of, again, a general distinction. And the gift is really, it's a voluntary contribution from an external, funder or support without really any expectation of economic or other tangible benefit in return. beyond what any member of the general public would receive. That's a gift. And the primary beneficiary of a gift is the public, not the donor, the person giving it. And again, those are accepted, administered by the foundation, UNLV Foundation, which is separate from the Office of Sponsor Programs. Then sponsor programs, what we've been talking about today, grants and contracts. They could be research, public service, other scholarly activity. That's a mutual exchange between involving the university and an external organization. So another little caveat here is sometimes we've had faculty opportunity awards. They're state fundings, they're internal. They're not external. They're not sponsor driven, not our office either. That will be run either sometimes out of the Vice President for Research and Economic Development's office, the Provost's office. So there will be some internal opportunities too. Those will be announced differently. The primary difference is our office is always going to deal with external funds, not internal pots of money, or if your department had funds or something to give, that won't run through us either. Sponsor programs also is not about procurement. So it's not about a sale of good or services or work for hire agreements. That's also not what we do at the university. So those are just some distinctions between gifts and work for hire arrangements. And so again, all sponsor programs are accepted, administered, submitted by my office on behalf of the university. And we look forward to working with you. Welcome to UNLV. We're so glad you're here. And I guess I've got maybe 8 minutes left of either your day or for questions.